My entire family, both parents, my brother, my sister-in-law, and every aunt and uncle who'd normally show up for something like this, chose a gender reveal party over sitting in a hospital waiting room during my double mastectomy. For weeks later, my mother called asking if I could help cover a family vacation. My name is Rosalind, and I want to walk you through exactly how a family ranks a scheduled surgery against a party involving colored smoke, and what happens when they come back needing something from the daughter they left alone in recovery. This story does not slow down. Stay with me. Fast context, because the pace only accelerates from here. I'm 34, the older of two siblings. My younger brother, Desmond, has always occupied a specific, familiar role in our family that I think a lot of people with siblings will recognize immediately, not through any particular fault of his own, necessarily, but through some long-established family dynamic where his milestones consistently generated more visible, coordinated enthusiasm than mine ever seemed to, in ways I'd mostly learned to accept without naming directly, the way you do with patterns you've lived inside your whole life. I was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer about 5 months before this story starts, following a routine mammogram that caught something my doctors described, repeatedly, as fortunate timing, caught early enough that my prognosis, following the recommended treatment path, was genuinely good. I want to be honest that genuinely good prognosis did not make the actual experience of the diagnosis, and everything that followed, feel remotely small or manageable in the moment. A double mastectomy, which my surgical team recommended and I ultimately chose after weighing the options carefully, was scheduled for a specific date roughly 3 months out from diagnosis, a date I told my entire family about the moment it was confirmed, specifically so everyone could plan around it. Desmond and his wife Odalise announced their pregnancy about 6 weeks after my diagnosis, and I want to be clear that my initial reaction was genuine, uncomplicated happiness for them. I love my brother. I'd been hoping for a niece or nephew for years, and nothing about my own diagnosis diminished my excitement for that news at all. The gender reveal party, when it was announced roughly 2 months later, was scheduled. I want to be precise about this, because the exact sequence of events matters enormously to what happened, for the exact same Saturday as my surgery. Not approximately the same week. The same day, a detail Odalise apparently either didn't check against my already confirmed, already communicated surgery date, or checked and decided didn't matter enough to adjust around. I want to describe what happened when I raised this conflict, because it set the tone for everything that followed. I texted my mother, gently, pointing out the overlap, assuming, the way I imagine most people would assume, given the relative stakes involved, that a party celebrating a baby's sex would obviously, easily be moved a week in either direction to accommodate a family member's cancer surgery. Oh no, that's a bummer. My mother texted back. Odalise already ordered the reveal cake and booked the venue though. I'm sure the surgery will be quick, right? We'll come see you after. I want to sit with that response for a moment, because I think it tells you almost everything you need to know about how the following weeks unfolded. Not, let me talk to Odalise about moving it. Not, of course we'll be there for you instead. A logistics-focused acknowledgement of a cake and venue booking, treated as a more fixed, immovable constraint than a scheduled cancer surgery. I want to describe the actual day itself, because I think it matters to understanding the full weight of what happened. I went into surgery that Saturday morning with Aurelio, my husband, and my closest friend Beatrice beside me in the waiting room. I want to tell you honestly that I had, right up until the actual morning of the procedure, held on to some small, quiet hope that my parents, at least, would decide, at the last minute, that this specific milestone outweighed a party. They did not. I came out of a 5-hour surgery to Aurelio's face and to a text from my mother, sent hours earlier, that read, "Thinking of you today? The reveal is so cute. It's pink. We'll swing by tomorrow to see how you're doing, two hearts." I want to describe what swing by tomorrow actually looked like, because it compounds the entire situation in a way that I think matters. My parents visited for approximately 20 minutes the following afternoon, mostly, I want to be honest, talking about the party, the cake, the smoke bombs, a video Odalise had made that they insisted on showing me on my mother's phone while I was still recovering from anesthesia and significant surgical pain, before leaving, citing an unrelated family dinner they didn't want to be late for. I want to tell you what I did in the immediate aftermath, because I think it matters to how the rest of this story unfolds. I didn't say anything dramatic in the moment. I was, quite literally, recovering from major surgery, with limited capacity for anything beyond basic physical functioning in those first several days. But I want to be honest that something in me shifted, quietly and permanently, during that specific 20-minute visit, watching my mother scroll through gender reveal photos on her phone, while I lay in a hospital bed processing a cancer diagnosis and a surgery that had just permanently altered my body. For weeks later, Once I was home, mostly recovered, still working through the early stages of what would be an additional several months of follow-up treatment, my mother called. I want to describe the tone of that call carefully, because it was, in almost every respect, completely ordinary. Cheerful, casual, carrying no acknowledgement whatsoever of the preceding month, as though the surgery, the party, and everything about how those two events had been prioritized against each other had simply never happened. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "I wanted to ask you something. Your father and I have been wanting to take a family trip before the baby comes. Everyone together. One last big vacation before things get busy with Desmond and Odalise. We found a great deal on a beach house, but it's a bit more than we budgeted for. Would you be able to help cover part of it? We thought since you're doing well financially, it might be an easy way to help make it happen for everyone." I sat with that request for a long moment, genuinely needing to process the sheer scale of the disconnect before I could formulate any response at all. For weeks. For weeks after a surgery my own family had deprioritized behind a party involving colored powder, I was being asked to help finance a celebratory vacation for the same family, framed as a simple, reasonable favor between people who cared about each other. "You want me to help pay for a family vacation," I said, "a month after you chose a gender reveal party over my cancer surgery." There was a pause, the specific pause of someone genuinely not having connected those two things until I said them out loud together. "This isn't really related to that," she said. "This is just about wanting one last trip together before the baby comes. We thought, since you're doing well, it might be an easy way to help the family." I want to describe what happened over the following conversation, because it revealed, more clearly than almost anything else in this entire story, exactly how my family had processed, or, more accurately, failed to process at all, what they'd actually done a month earlier. When I raised the surgery directly, explaining that I genuinely could not separate the two things, that being asked for a significant financial favor so soon after being so completely deprioritized during a major medical crisis felt, to me, like a continuation of the exact same pattern rather than an unrelated request, my mother's response was one of the most clarifying moments of this entire ordeal. "I don't understand why you're still upset about this," she said. "The surgery went fine, didn't it? You're recovering well. I don't see why we need to keep bringing it up. The surgery went fine, didn't it?" I want to sit with that phrase for a moment, because I think it's the specific detail that, once I fully absorbed it, reframed my entire understanding not just of that single day, but of a much longer pattern I'd apparently been living inside for most of my adult life, without fully naming it. The actual medical outcome of my surgery had, apparently, retroactively determined how seriously my family believed they needed to have treated it in the moment, as though a good outcome meant the deprioritization hadn't really mattered, rather than understanding that the outcome was, at the time of their decision, genuinely unknown, and they had chosen a party over showing up for me regardless. I declined to help with the vacation. I want to be honest that this was, in some ways, one of the more difficult boundaries I've ever set with my family, because it required me to sit directly with my mother's clear disappointment and confusion, holding firm against years of learned instinct to simply smooth over conflict and accommodate what my family wanted, the way I'd apparently done, quietly, for most of my life. I want to tell you about the weeks that followed, because they escalated in ways I genuinely did not expect. My mother, apparently frustrated by my refusal, brought the situation to the rest of the family, framing it, according to what I heard secondhand from an aunt who reached out privately, uncomfortable with how the whole thing was being characterized, as me being dramatic and making everything about the surgery, when, in her retelling, everyone had shown up eventually and everything turned out fine. I want to describe the conversation I eventually had with Desmond directly, because it was, in some ways, the most important one of this entire story. I asked him, plainly, whether he had ever, at any point in the weeks leading up to that Saturday, considered asking Odalise to move the party once he learned it conflicted directly with my scheduled surgery. His answer, delivered with what I could tell was genuine, if belated, discomfort, was one I've turned over many times since. "I didn't want to make Odalise feel like the pregnancy stuff was less important," he said. "And honestly, I figured you'd understand, because you always seem to handle things well. I think I just assumed you'd be okay either way. You always seem to handle things well." Another version of the same underlying assumption, from a different family member, stated plainly within the same difficult stretch of weeks, and I want to be honest that hearing it articulated so clearly, twice, was, in its own way, almost more clarifying than the original day itself. My entire family, it seemed, had built an unspoken but consistent understanding of me as the sibling whose crises could be safely deprioritized, precisely because I had, for years, made it easy for them to believe exactly that. I want to tell you what I did next, because I think it's the part of this story that matters most, even though it's less dramatic than the initial confrontation. I didn't cut my family off entirely. I want to be clear about that, because I think there's sometimes an expectation in stories like this that the only meaningful response to this kind of pattern is complete estrangement, and that's not the choice I ultimately made, at least not immediately. What I did instead was significantly, deliberately restructure the terms of my relationship with almost everyone involved. Considerably reduced willingness to accommodate financial requests without genuine reciprocity, much clearer boundaries around what kind of emotional labor I was willing to keep providing, and a new, explicit expectation stated directly to my parents and Desmond that showing up for each other in this family needed to become a two-way commitment going forward, applied consistently regardless of which sibling's milestone happened to be more conventionally exciting in the moment. I want to be honest that this shift did not go smoothly or immediately. There were several more difficult conversations over the following months, moments where old patterns tried to reassert themselves, family gatherings, including, eventually, my niece's actual birth, several months after the reveal party that had displaced my surgery, where I could feel the specific, uncomfortable tension of people recalibrating around a version of me that no longer automatically absorbed things the way I always had before. I want to tell you about my continued treatment during this same period, because I think it matters that this entire family reckoning was happening in parallel with several more months of my own actual medical care, follow-up appointments, ongoing monitoring, the specific, grinding exhaustion of recovering from major surgery, while simultaneously renegotiating fundamental family dynamics I'd apparently been quietly accepting for most of my life. I want to be honest that holding both of those things at once, physical healing and this much harder, slower emotional reckoning, was, in many ways, more difficult than either would have been entirely on its own. I started therapy about 6 weeks after the surgery, once the acute physical recovery had progressed enough to leave room for the deeper processing my therapist and I both recognized was needed. She has helped me understand that what happened wasn't really, at its core, about a single scheduling conflict, however painful that conflict was in the moment. It was about a long-established, largely unspoken family pattern finally becoming impossible to ignore or rationalize away, one that required not just processing that specific Saturday, but genuinely reevaluating years of smaller, similar moments I'd previously absorbed without fully naming them for what they actually were. I think, more than anything, about lying in that hospital bed the day after my surgery, watching my mother scroll through gender reveal photos on her phone, genuinely searching, in that specific moment, for some sign that she understood the disconnect between what she was showing me and what I had just been through. I don't think she did, not at the time. I think it took my own, deliberate refusal several weeks later, the vacation request, and my decision to finally decline it clearly rather than accommodate it the way I always had, to make that disconnect impossible to keep ignoring. It's been just over a year and a half now. My mother said something to me about 8 months after everything happened that I still think about often, sitting at her own kitchen table, a conversation that felt, finally, like genuine reckoning rather than defensive minimizing. She said, "I don't think we ever really thought about what it cost you, being the one who always seemed fine no matter what. I think we just got used to it being easy, and I'm sorry it took you finally saying no to something for us to actually see what that ease had actually been built on." I didn't fully believe her sincerity at the time. I want to be honest that trust, once specifically eroded this way, doesn't rebuild instantly just because someone finally says the right words. I believe it more now, watching the actual, sustained pattern of behavior that has followed that conversation, rather than just the words themselves, including, notably, my entire family rearranging an upcoming holiday gathering months later around my most recent follow-up scan date, without my even having to ask. If you've ever discovered, through some specific, undeniable moment, that your family had quietly built an entire dynamic around your willingness to be endlessly resilient, and had to decide, for the first time, what happens when you finally stop being quite so endlessly accommodating, I want to hear about it. I think there's something important about naming these long, slow-building patterns clearly, because they rarely announce themselves as starkly as a missed surgery followed by a vacation request does. And sometimes it takes exactly that kind of unmistakable moment to finally see a pattern you've been living inside for years without fully naming it. One empty hospital waiting room. One phone call 4 weeks later. That's all it took to finally understand exactly where I'd been ranked in my own family, and exactly how long I'd been quietly, willingly accepting it.